Okay, so welcome to this short video about postmodernist views of family life. So we can use two analogies to explain the postmodernist view and the structuralist view. So the structuralist view comes first because that includes functionalist views, Marxist views and feminist views of family life. So the structuralist view sees societies like a web where each individual and each family and each group is part of an interconnected web of relationships. So the structure creates order because there's consistent and predictable behaviour, but there are limits to what everyone can do. So the decisions you make are limited by your role, your responsibilities, which give the predictable, orderly pattern to human behaviour. So the postmodernist view sees society as more like a supermarket where the individual is surrounded by many choices, and so relationships in family life are characterised by a lot of choice and a lot of change which has led to that choice. So change in terms of women's rights, social class, mobility, ethnic mobility, decline of racism. All of these barriers which are part of this structure which gives order and predictability are breaking down, and so the barriers, the identities, the groups are all fragmenting and breaking up. So this is a good way of explaining family life. But just as in a supermarket you have the kind of paradox of choice, you've got so much choice, it creates a lot of uncertainty and even anxiety. In the same way, family life is now so fragmented and so characterised by choice that we've got more anxiety, but also it's a double-edged sword because we've got the benefit of more choice, which can create freedom and equal rights. Okay, so the postmodernists are the sociologists who think we've entered this new phase of family life. The new phase of family life and society is characterised by more choice, more change, more unpredictability, uncertainty, instability. Postmodern society is more chaotic because there's less order, which is the opposite of chaos, which means you can't predict what's going to happen, and that could include a change in your working life, unemployment, the economy changes quickly and your relationships change quickly. You might become divorced, you could lose your relationships with your children. So it's a new stage of society. Postmodernists also think we can pick and mix from very diverse cultures and lifestyles. So we can make choices to combine different cultural traditions like South Asian, African Caribbean, white British, middle class, all kinds of different traditions and lifestyles. Technology gives us more change because we've got more freedom to plot our own life courses. We can travel, transport, and produce and consume goods over greater distances. Okay, so Judith Stacy is one of the key postmodernists who argues that we have postmodern families. So she uses the term postmodern families because she thinks, unlike other thinkers like Chester, that there is a dramatic and significant change in family life. So she thinks that there's more freedom and choice, especially women are change agents. So the case study she carried out in Silicon Valley showed that women were change agents who had rejected traditional roles and organised family life and relationships around their needs. She describes the divorce extended family, which is connected by divorce in-laws relationships. So she gives the example of someone, I think, called Pam, who has a relationship with her ex-husband's new partner and shares childcare with that person, which is quite unconventional. The problem with this view as an evaluation point would be given by Robert Chester, who would argue that family life has not changed dramatically or significantly. Instead of thinking that families have greater freedom and choice, and that women are organising family life around their needs. He would emphasise that family life still involves a fairly traditional two-parent structure where children are raised, and there are increasing dual career families, but women are still under greater pressure to provide housework and childcare compared to men. Another postmodernist view of family life is you can't make generalisations about family life. So this would contrast with Parsons and Murdoch, who argue you can make generalisations about family life because there are large-scale patterns of nuclear families, which is the most ideal and normal type. So the postmodernists disagree with this. Families are not single things, they're not generic, they're very diverse, and so family has been redefined. And sociologists should therefore look at how people create family life rather than assuming it follows a certain model. The individualisation thesis is basically the argument that people are increasingly able to exercise their own choice to suit their own needs as individuals in family life and relationships. So Anthony Giddens, he argues that there's such a thing as pure relationships. So he describes this development from the past, where there was a kind of pre-modern society, feudal society, where you had knights and ladies. And he says that there was romantic love was developed then, where you had the idea of one person that's perfect for you as a soulmate for all time, and that you will stay with that person for the rest of your life. And that became part of modern society. So whereas before there was an economic arrangement as the basis for family relationships, so women would be married to men because it was an economic arrangement, men are and women are increasingly choosing freely to identify their romantic soulmate. And that's in the modern era where people are more economically have more freedom. But then in the postmodern era, we see another shift to what we call plastic sexuality. So plastic means flexible, malleable, changeable, something you can adjust or fit. Like a piece of putty can be sculpted or moulded into whatever shape you want it to be. So the idea is that plastic sexuality is where you can choose who, what, why, where, when, to have sex in any way you wish, what kind of sexual relationships. It's partly to do with contraception and reproductive technology, IVF, abortions. So women are able to increasingly have more freedom of choice and exercise more control over when and how they have children, or whether they want to be voluntarily childless, which is about 10% of the population. A pure relationship is based on, supported by this plastic sexuality, where people have choices about who they have a relationship with, and it's all based on mutual satisfaction of individual needs. In other words, does your partner satisfy you? Do you satisfy your partner? If not, you move on, the relationship ends. This can potentially lead to freedom and equality between men and women, and between all groups of people, children and parents and so on, because Giddens, an optimistic note, says that it can lead to equal rights. Giddens describes same-sex couples as pioneers because they're forging new ground. They're not bound by tradition. Same-sex couples often tend to be more characterised by equality and individual negotiation and choice. The same-sex couples negotiate what tasks they want to do in the family, what roles they want to have, and they're not limited by the traditional model of the family, which is gendered and based on traditional patriarchal structure, with the man being the breadwinner, the woman being the homemaker. Ulrich Beck describes society as a risk society in a late modern or postmodern stage. So this is where there's a greater deal of risk. People are more aware of risks and more anxious about avoiding hazards or risks. So this is partly because of the fact that we are an information society now. So in a late modern stage, we have more information. and more awareness of the potential risks. So we act like kind of assessors, like an insurance actuary, someone who assesses risk for a company and taking any business decision or for insurance purposes. In the same way as an individual, we're thrown back on ourselves to make choices, to calculate the risks and the rewards of the different options in front of us. Do we get married? There's the risk of divorce. Do we have children? There's the risk that things could go wrong. We're always aware of the different issues in terms of health, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually and physically. So this can lead to a less patriarchal family with more equality and individualism. But it means that family life is always negotiated. It's not set in stone. It's not predetermined or preconceived. We can't rely on traditional expectations, and therefore we're constantly thrown back on ourselves to negotiate, to make choices, to argue for our needs, for our points, and for our concerns as individuals. So it can create a kind of anxious, lonely, and isolated and impersonal sense of relationships. Instability, family life is more unstable. Individuals can leave if their needs are not met, divorce, separation, reconstituted families, blended families, same-sex families. All of these forms of family diversity are more common as a result of individualisation. Ulrich Beck argues the family is like a zombie. It's, the lights are on but no one's home. It appears alive but it's dead. So the traditional model of the family is no longer reliable or serving as a predictable model for family life. So people are turning to the family for security because they think it's alive, but it's too unstable to provide this. It's actually dead. So people will have to rely on themselves, and increasingly this creates more anxiety. From a personal life perspective, this is all very exaggerated and ignores the continuing role of structures in our lives. So the personal life perspective would criticise postmodernist and individualisation theorists for downplaying, ignoring and underplaying the existence of continuing structures in our lives which continue to affect our choices and limit our freedoms. So people like Carol Smart and Vanessa May said social norms remain important, people still get married, for example, and that's the main kind of model of family life they aspire to, is two-parent family. The decisions are made in a context, political, social, cultural experiences. Structural factors such as the economy and income will limit and shape the choices you can make, so not everyone can get divorced. They might feel, and for example, after divorce settlements, it's women who get custody of children most commonly, so therefore limited in terms of their careers. So again, that's a structural factor which limits the amount of choice and individual freedom that each person has, especially for some members of society such as women, ethnic minorities, working class, and younger people. Giddens and Beck are both white middle class males, and they are probably adopting a more ethnocentric, biased view of the individual from their cultural perspective, which suggests that they are exaggerating the extent of choice from their perspective.